We are now live, Chairman.
Okay, well, welcome everyone to today's virtual meeting of the Lincolnshire Schools Forum on the 30th of June 2022, starting just slightly after 1 o'clock. My name is Gavin Booth and I am the chairman of this meeting. Before we begin, we have some matters of procedure to mention. So obviously today's proceedings will be audio broadcasted and recorded. When invited to speak, if members and officers could unmute their microphones and switch on their videos. And then when you've finished, if you wouldn't mind turning those back off again so that we stay on mute and videos off. We find that helps with the stability of the connection if we keep videos off. If during any of the debates a member or an officer would like to ask a further question or raise a point, please can you use the chat function, which you'll see at the top is indicated by the speech bubble, and just write that you'd like to speak in the comment box. We'll then come to you in due course.
You're muted, Chairman.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. How much of that did we get to? So we're talking about the chat function as always. So using the chat function if required. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, it's recommended that you kind of hit the leave button and then try and rejoin, and we'll admit you as soon as possible. If for any reason we're made aware that the public can't access by remote means or that we're not able to record, we will adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes and then allow people to log back in. So moving on, can I please ask Tom Cross, Democratic Service Officer, to confirm the presence of all members and officers in attendance at today's meeting? Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'll do a quick roll call. Keena Adkins.
Hello.
Thank you. Alan Howe.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody.
Thanks. Catherine Stratton. Michelle Anderson. Rachel Barrett. I can see Professor Ken Durans is here. Thanks for that. Stephen Baragwana. Simon Pickett.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Gavin Booth.
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you. Katie Ravill.
Hello, everyone.
Thank you. Lee Mason.
Afternoon.
Thanks. Josh Greaves.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you. Andy Watts. Julia Merivale.
Yes, present.
Thank you. Peter Tomlinson.
Yeah.
Thank you. Heather Marks.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. That's all members, Chairman.
And officers. Which officers do we have in attendance today?
Officers, I believe we have Elizabeth Bowes.
Afternoon, everybody.
Thank you. Eileen McMorrow.
Maybe she's joining us later on.
Right, okay. Martin Smith.
Good afternoon, colleagues.
Thank you. Tony Warnock.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Geraldine O'Neill.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. Angela Lawton.
Angela's arriving at about 1:30.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe that's Apple and myself, Thomas Crofts, clerk to this meeting. I believe that's all, officers, Chairman.
Thank you very much. And is there anyone participating today that has not had their name called? Just in case we've missed anybody off the list.
I'm Jordan Ingram. I'm just observing from Department for Education.
Thanks, Jordan. I was going to mention that shortly. Yes, so we have a colleague from the ESFA, Jordan, joining us today. The ESFA are monitoring the effectiveness of Schools Forum, although that kind of is still a local authority function. Jordan's here just as an observer today, so thank you for joining us. So moving on then to item number 1, which is the election of the chairman. Obviously, I'm very happy to continue if required to, but if there are any other members who are wanting to take on the chair, please can we have those nominations now? Okay. Josh.
Thank you, Gavin. Can I propose Gavin Booth?
Oh, that's very kind of you. That requires seconding, if anybody's happy to second.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Julia Merivale.
Thank you. So as far as we know, there are no other nominations unless anybody else want to come forward. Tom will now take a vote. Can you please state your vote after your name is called?
So yes, if you could please state for or against. Tina Adkins.
For.
Alan Howe.
For.
Professor Ken Durham. I think you muted. I think you muted there, Professor.
For.
Thank you very much. Stephen Barraguine. Oh, sorry. He's absent. Simon Pickett.
For.
Thank you. Gavin Booth.
I'm for that.
Katie Graville.
For.
Thank you. Lee Mason.
For.
Thank you. Josh Greaves is seconded. Julia Merivale is seconded, I believe, actually, wasn't it? That's correct.
Yeah.
Peter Tomlinson. Thank you. Heather Marks.
Oh.
Thank you. That's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much. That's Gavin Booth as appointed for chairman of the forum for the next municipal year. We then move on to item 2, which is the election of the vice chairman. I'll take nominations for vice chair. Now, I have already had a conversation with Josh. He's happy to continue, but are there any other people that would wish to be nominated? If you wouldn't mind putting that in the chat. If there isn't anybody else, then I would like to propose Josh as vice chair of the Schools Forum for the next year. Do I have anybody that's prepared to second that? And Julia straight in there. Thank you, Julia. Happy to second. So that's Gavin proposed and Julia to second for Josh to be vice chair. Are you happy to proceed, Josh?
I am. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, Tom, over to you to take a vote then, please, on the vice chair role.
Thank you. Again, for or against. Tina Atkins.
For.
Thank you. Alan Howe.
For.
Thank you. Professor Ken Durham. Well, you're muted again, unfortunately.
For.
Thank you. Simon Pickett.
For.
Gavin Booth.
For.
Thank you. Katie Graville.
For.
Thank you. Lee Mason.
For.
Thank you. Josh Greaves.
Also for.
Thank you. Julia Merivale. Seconder.
For.
Peter Tomlinson.
For.
Thank you. And Heather Marks.
Sorry, for. Thank you.
Thank you. That's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So we say thank you, and Josh Greaves is appointed as vice chairman for the forum for the next municipal year. So thank you all very much for that and for continuing to support. We'll move on to item 3, which is apologies for absence and replacement members. So Tom, can we have the apologies, please?
Yes, we have apologies from Amy Stancer, Daniel Callahan, Callum Clay, Francis Green, Dr. Stephen Hopkins, Joe Slesser, Simon Morley, Tony Stevens, and from officers Mark Popplewell and Sheridan Dodsworth. Chairman, have you got your camera on? Because I can't see you on the screen yet.
I have, as far as I'm aware. I can see myself, so yeah.
I can see Gavin.
Must be my end then.
It's probably selective editing from your end, Tom, I would say. Right, thanks for that. So that's all of the apologies and replacement members. We'll move on to item number 4, which is declarations of members' interest. Do members have any interests they wish to declare? And if so, can you type speak into the chat function? We'll just give you a second to do that if that's required. Right, that doesn't appear to be the case. So we'll move on then to item number 5, which is the minutes of the Lincolnshire Schools Forum meeting held on the 21st of April 2022. I'd like to propose the minutes as a correct record. Do I have a seconder, please?
I'll second that. It's been my
Thank
job
you.
today.
Yeah, thank you, Julia, for being so quick on the mute and unmute. So that's seconded by Julia. So therefore, it's proposed and seconded that the minutes be approved. If there's anybody wishing to abstain, can you please indicate that in the chat? And also, if there's anybody wishing to vote against them being an accurate record, could they also put that in the chat? I've got my eye on the chat here and it doesn't appear to be anything in there. So in the absence of any votes against the proposition will be carried and therefore we'll take those forward as an accurate record of the previous meeting. Right, so moving on to item number 6, which is the chairman's announcements. Just to make the forum aware that the the budget allocation for early support learning provision beyond September 2023 has been deferred to October. That allows us to accommodate the council decision-making timetable concerning their children with disabilities service review. So that's obviously work happening behind the scenes at the council, which just is going to delay that paper. And then the alternative provision arrangements item has also been deferred so that the whole academic year for 21-22 can be reflected in the report. So it's just those 2 items to note. So then we move on to agenda item 7, which is the Lincolnshire Schools Forum Constitution and Membership Update, which is on pages 11 to 30 of your pack. I believe now that it's not Mark Popper, we're inviting Lizzie Bowes, Strategic Finance Manager, to present this report. Members will be asked to note the contents of the report and endorse the updated constitution and membership. So I'll hand over to you, Lizzie. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. Afternoon, everybody. So the purpose of the report is to provide the forum with an update to Lincolnshire Schools Forum Constitution and Membership document as detailed in Appendix A. Lincolnshire Schools Forum Constitution and Memberships are detailed on pages 15 to 23, and the ESFA copy of the Schools Forum Powers and Responsibilities are detailed on pages 25 to 30. The Schools Forum and Constitution are governed by regulations, legislation and terms of reference, including the Schools Forum regulations and the Schools and Early Years Finance regulations. Members will recall a review of the terms of reference was undertaken last year and formally approved by the Executive Council for Children's Services in September. Although the Schools and Early Years financial regulations have been updated, they've only been updated to reflect changes to the funding formula for the current year compared to the previous year. There haven't been any changes in the regulations that will impact the operating framework of the forum. The updated terms of reference comprise 7 areas as detailed on page 12. The membership composition of the forum has been reviewed and updated to reflect the current position as detailed in Appendix A on page 16. The school's membership composition remains unchanged for 22-23. The composition of the forum and terms of reference are reviewed on an annual basis, ready for the new academic year, and the Executive Councillor for Children's Services will be briefed of the position. I'll touch on this more in a later paper, but members should be aware that the school funding reforms that the government wish to implement in future years could change the operational running of the forum. And as Gavin said, the forum is asked to note the content of the report and endorse the updated constitution and membership documents.
Right, thank you very much, Lizzie. Has anybody got any questions they would like to direct to Lizzie on that particular paper? I think the only thing that I would add to that is obviously, as Lizzie's just mentioned, that the Constitution is there, and we are kind of happy with the representative nature of that. But obviously, that only works if we're able to successfully fulfil all of the vacancies that we have on the forum. So again, as always, a plea from me that where we have vacancies within your sector, if you can encourage at the next opportunity that we can encourage people to apply for that as much as they possibly can, so that we can fulfill and fill all of those kind of roles going forwards. That would be excellent. So thank you for that. So we were asked to note the contents of the report. I propose that we've now done that. Does anyone disagree? Just keeping my eye on the chat for that. in the absence then of anybody disagreeing in the chat, then I'd like to say that we have indeed noted the contents of that report, and we will then move on to item number 8. So item number 8 is the Schools Forum Self-Assessment Toolkit, and you remember this was raised by a member at the early point in the year, I think, or maybe even in last year, where we said that we wanted to make sure that we were filling in the self-assessment toolkit, that we were kind of ensuring that the work that the forum is undertaking is as good as it can be. So I think Mark took that away and started to produce and look at the self-assessment toolkit. So we'll hand over to Lizzie to kind of give us an update on where we are with that currently.
Thank you, Gavin. So as Gavin's already said, this is something that we now undertake on an annual basis in terms of the assessment of the operation and effectiveness based on this self-assessment toolkit. Whilst we complete it, we will look at the strengths and weaknesses of the forum, and those are discussed with the chair prior to the meeting. Before I ask for any specific comments, there's just a couple of areas I'd like to draw your attention to. Firstly, section 11 in terms of induction and training for new members. The local authority has reviewed the previous training offer that was put in place to support new members or existing members who require a refresh. The local authority will have this in place for the autumn term following the election of new members. The forum, as you know, has also considered whether meetings should be virtual or face-to-face, and at the moment they've opted for virtual. This will be periodically reviewed, but at the moment, recognising the rural size of Lincolnshire, virtual is felt to be the most suitable option for the time being. I'll open it up to any questions or comments.
Thank you. If you'd like to ask any questions, can you please indicate that in the chat? Whilst waiting for those to come through, I just want to say thank you to Lizzie and Mark for kind of putting this together. This is, like I say, a request that came from the forum itself, so we're pleased to see that that's been continued and repeated again this year. I think when that training comes online that Liz has been referring to, I would, encourage all members of the forum. I don't think, I'm trying to remember the last opportunity that we had for that to kind of maybe partake in that refresher, even if they're not new to the forum. I think it'd be really useful kind of to revisit that and have that opportunity to have that training updated. So we'll look and make sure that you're well aware of the dates going forward. As there aren't any other comments in the chat, we were asked to note the item, so I propose that we've done that. Does anyone disagree? In that case, then I would say that proposition is carried, and we'll move on to agenda item number 9. So this is the section 251 budget statements for 22-23, which is on pages 37 to 44 of your pack. Again, this item is for noting of the contents, and we'll go back to you, Lizzie, to present, but we do encourage members as much as possible to try and ask Lizzie some questions and see where we get to at the end of this paper. So thank you.
Thank you, Gavin. So the purpose of this report is to provide the Schools Forum with a copy of the Section 251 budget statement for the 22-23 financial year. Each year, the local authority are required to submit an education and social care budget statement, commonly referred to as a Section 251. The return demonstrates the local authority's intentions in terms of spend for the year on schools budgets, dedelegated items, high needs block, early years and central budgets. To ensure compliance with statutory regulations, a copy of the return is available on the link at the bottom of page 37 of the report. As members will be aware from the school's funding arrangements paper presented in the January meeting, the DSG continues to consist of 4 blocks, which were considered as part of the local authority's budget setting exercise. There continue to be restrictions in terms of the movement from the schools block to other blocks, as detailed on page 38. The only block transfer the local authority has made for 22-23 relates to the movement of £0.260 million from the central school services block to the schools block. As you will recall, the transfer was necessary to meet the additional costs incurred from an increase in free school meal eligibility due to the pandemic. The scale of the increases are detailed on page 38. The funding the local authority receives from central government does not reflect this increase, as it uses prior year pupil characteristics data. In the April Schools Forum meeting, Mark presented a paper detailing the outcomes of the National Funding Formula consultation. The government has launched a second phase of the consultation with a closing date of early September. As it always does, the local authority will respond to the consultation, ensuring Lincolnshire schools are represented, including the importance of retaining local flexibility to best support local needs. A copy of the consultation is included at the bottom of page 38. The total DSG for 2023 is 679.258 million. Attached to the report is a copy of the local authority table for 22-23. It provides an overall picture of the funding being allocated directly to schools and high needs delegations, the amount being spent on education centrally and children's social care. I'll now go through some of the key areas of the table. It's a standardised format and is split into two key areas. The DSG, which includes those services that I discussed at Schools Forum, are represented in the top half from section 1.01 to 1.10.2. And areas of children's services where decisions are made by the council from lines 2.0.1 and below. Line 1.0.1, individual school budgets, details the budgets for maintaining primary, secondary and early years provision. This includes the schools block of the DSG. 99.81% of that is devolved to the schools. The remainder relates to growth, which is included in line 1.4.10. Line 1.0.2 details place funding within the high needs sector. Lines 1.2.1 and 1.2.2 relates to the funding that mainstream schools, academies, free schools and colleges receive for educational healthcare plans. Line 1.2.3 relates to where Lincolnshire is unable to meet the high needs provision and therefore alternative provision is required. This includes out of county where the budget is 11.6 million. 1.2.4 relates to high needs targeted funding. As part of Lincolnshire strategy, the local authority is keen to support preventative measures. Line 1.2.8 represent these services which are not statutory but are fundamental to Lincolnshire supporting our schools and include services such as outreach, BOSS, emotional wellbeing, healthy minds, team around the world and education of our school team. 1.3.1 relates to early years centrally held budgets within the early years block. The section 1.9 and 1.10 detail the DSG and recoupment. The local authority retains funding for maintained schools, which is then delegated to schools. However, the delegated budgets for academies and academy special schools place funding is recouped from the local authority by the ESFA and is paid directly to academies via their GAG using LTC's agreed formula. The early years block is allocated to the sector based on participation levels. It is anticipated that of this block, just over 96% of funding will be allocated to the early years sector by the end of the financial year, with the remainder of funding a number of statutory duties. Within the higher needs block, just over 75% is earmarked to devolve out to Lincolnshire schools, colleges and early years for pupils requiring additional support, with the remainder of funding for school support services. In terms of children's services, there are two areas of financial risk that are high risk, demand-led areas. These are home to school transport, covering rows 2.1.4 for 2.1.8, which total just over £40 million, and children in care services, rows 3.1.1 to 3.1.10, which totals just under £38 million. Returning to the main body of the report, we've previously discussed the continued growth in demand within high needs and the financial impact this is having. The government has responded positively to the financial demands placed on the high needs block via a minimum 8% per head increase in funding, additional supplementary funding and nationally invested in capital funding over the next 3 years of over £2.6 billion. However, spending levels continue to grow and the government does not feel the current level of funding is sustainable. The SEND Green Paper recognises this and the consultation will close towards the end of July. A link is detailed at the bottom of page 39. The sector are encouraged to respond to this consultation. In 22-23, Lincolnshire received just under £9 million of protection funding following the implementation of the Higher Needs National Funding Formula to provide stability against the prior year's funding formula. In terms of conclusion, officers will continue to review the government's publications that implicate 22-23 funding, including amendments to the schools and early years financial regulations to ensure full compliance is achieved. Financial monitoring of budgets will be carried out throughout 22-23 in accordance with the Council's budget monitoring framework. The risk and impact analysis is detailed on page 40, but there continue to be risks around the Central School Services block due to the reduction in historical commitment funding whilst the PFI contract remains in place. There are risks around affordability of the schools block regarding free school meal eligibility, especially in the current financial climate. The higher needs block, as I've already mentioned, there's continued growth in the sector and the financial impact this has on the higher needs block. So the forum is asked to note the content of the report.
Thank you, Lizzie, and can I just say thank you as well for the report, particularly the section around risks and impact analysis. That's something as a forum again that we requested a bit more detail on in the reports, and I've noted that at the reports at the last meeting and this one that we are seeing a lot more detail in that risks and impact analysis section. So thank you for the time that's gone into that. Does anybody have any questions for Lizzie on this paper? If you could indicate so in the chat, that would be helpful. We've got a hand there. Or, Josh.
Thank you, Chair. And it relates to the risk section, which I agree is helpful. Hi, Lizzie. Thank you very much. Just a quick one on the FSM uptick and free school meals increases that you've discussed a number of times with us over since the profile shifted during the COVID period. What it seems to be describing there is a tension between the national minimum funding guarantee and the available resources and how flexible you can be. What would we do if there wasn't enough money to distribute within the methodology permitted?
There's a variety of things that we'll need to look at. So the first thing we're doing at the moment is, as you know from previous conversations, initially the concerns have been about the increase due to the pandemic. And now we're concerned about, obviously, given the current climate and inflation, whether actually that's going to increase again. So the first we're doing at the moment is trying to model actually what that increase looks like at the moment to kind of see if we are going to have a funding gap issue come the autumn. And then it's a case of we can look at a variety of different things. It might be a case of doing a transfer into the schools block like we did this last year. We'll look at the growth budget again to see if there's any flexibility in that. The next thing we'll be looking at the MFG. So you'll recall this year the maximum MFG could be at 2%. We set it at the lower level of 0.5%. And then it comes to looking at other things. So it might be a case of looking at, say, reduction of the ORPU funding by, say, 0.5%. There are different elements of the formula that we can move to a certain amount. However, we are now slightly more constrained because the last consultation that's come out regarding the formula going forward, the government's intention is to get everybody closer to that, to those formula values. So we can't go too far away from them, but there is some flexibility around those side of things. So there's lots of different modelling that we can do. When we've consulted schools on this in the past, we've kind of given 4 options, and there hasn't really been a consensus. There's kind of schools have answered it differently. There hasn't been a kind of a clear steer. So we'll look at all the different modelling and then determine the most preferable that has the least financial impact on schools.
Sorry, Gavin, I think you said my name there. I'm not sure you're on mute. You're on mute, Gavin, sorry.
New laptop, can't work the buttons. Yeah, and I don't know if you had your hand back up there because you were wanting to come back on that.
Just if permission, just a really quick thought. Thank you, Lizzie. That's really clear. When you described making a decision on what is the perhaps the least worst option in the circumstances, would that be a matter for Schools Forum or would that be an officer decision, executive?
No, it will be brought to the forum, but it's an executive local authority decision.
Okay, thank you. It's very helpful.
Brilliant. Thanks, Josh. Thanks, Lily. Professor Durans, have you got a question? I see your hand is up.
Yes, sir. I assume that we no longer within the county have any full-time places for our high needs students, data full-time, and we have to go out of county. I was just wondering, in the third paragraph at page 39, we refer to out of county placements. I'm just wondering how, because there's high pressure on our needs block, how much it's costing us to go out of county.
I believe that is 11.6 million. Andrew, is that correct? Is it 11.6 for out of county?
Yes, that's correct. 11.6.
Thank you very much. You said 11.6 million?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think I'm right in saying, Lizzie and colleagues, that obviously there is provision within county, but where we feel we can't meet need or don't have enough available places, that's when we're going out of county for that.
Absolutely, yes. Obviously, it's always a preference to go in county first, but that's when we haven't got those capacity or those places.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Ken. And over to you, Keena.
Hi there. Hi, Lizzie. It's actually related to what Professor Durans was saying. Actually, has there been any analysis on the number of pupils who are in independent schools, and who specifically are only there purely because of lack of space in special schools? I've had a conversation only today where a Year 7 boy who is quite able for us, even as a special school, is currently being put into an independent setting because there isn't enough space, and yet we as special schools also have our very, very high-end pupils who are unable to get into independent settings because obviously providers for all needs. So, and what's the plan moving forward? As we expand, for example, for my school, is there a drive to get them out of those independent settings as a priority to reduce that 11.6 million? Because I'm pretty confident special schools would benefit from something of that 11.6 going into independent schools. So I just wondered what the strategy is for that.
Could I just recap the question because you kept on breaking up, so it was a little bit kind of robotic my side. But were you just asking whether kind of there was analysis in terms of what those places that are using that 11.6 million?
Yeah, and whether there's any what the strategy is in terms of trying to reduce that down by either kind of trying to identify and find those additional places within current Lincolnshire schools. So I don't know whether that's going to be addressed more by you, Lizzie, or whether that'll be addressed more by Angela in the next paper. I don't know where you want to deal with that.
I can see Martin's got his hand up. I don't know whether Martin's got something he'd like to comment on it.
Martin.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So, Keena, in terms of your question, as part of our transformation project, a work stream has been looking at the ability to transition into different settings, more cost-effective settings. The complexity of that is it's case by case and individual needs, and finding the right provision that can find the right needs at the right time in the right place. And on the scale of children we work with in Lincolnshire, you'll appreciate that's not necessarily an easy feat to do. It's like a never-ending jigsaw puzzle, but it is something that's been worked through in terms of looking at those children who could enter into mainstream, but also INMS into specialist provision. And we will keep working on that over the next sort of 12 to 24 months as we manage that. We're also looking at more efficient ways of commissioning. So where we commission places, seeing if there's the ability to have more efficient block placements, to manage that financial draw whilst meeting those needs. But I think we'll probably cover some of that in the annual SEND report as well.
Keena, is your hand up there in response, or is that still?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's probably going to come through in the next report by the sounds of it. So I'll pause and I won't say anything there, but thank you, Martin.
Yeah, thank you.
Chair, you've gone on mute again.
New laptop, can't cope. Old dog, new tricks, that kind of thing. So, Lizzie, I was going to ask, in terms of the money that's being devolved to schools, and obviously we can see there on page 39 that 99.8% of the funding is being devolved to schools. How do those percentages compare potentially with previous years? Are we pretty much passporting the same kind of percentage of funding over to schools going forward into the next academic year, or has that gone up or down? What's the variation?
In the schools block, it's almost identical, and it's very, very similar in either two blocks. It's actually slightly higher this year than last year, but it's on a very, very similar level.
Brilliant. Thank you. Ken, is that your hand up with a further question, or is that from the previous time? I think you're doing what I'm doing, Ken, and you're still on mute. We'll leave it with you to try and resolve the technical issues, and we can always come back to you if required. So in terms of the report, then we are asked to note the content. I propose that we've done that. If there's anybody that disagrees, can you please put that in the chat? Okay, in that case, I'm asked that we kind of carry that proposition and that we've move on to the next agenda item, which is linked to some of the discussion we've just had, which is item 10, the annual report on special educational needs and disabilities, which is pages 45 to 60. So we'll hand over to officers to present that. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So today I'm going to present the annual report for special educational needs and disabilities on behalf of Sheridan Dodsworth. So the purpose of this report is to give you an update on the current situation with SEND within Lincolnshire, both locally and nationally, give you an overview of the high needs costs, which Lizzie has just touched on as well, and an update on the impact of the transformation work so far. I'm happy to take some questions at the end, and for this I'll be supported by Kate Capel, Head of Service for Inclusion, for any questions you may ask. I won't read all of the paper, I'll just tease some of the key points out for you. But in terms of Lincolnshire and national context, it's worth noting in 2020-2021, 16.9% of Lincolnshire's pupils had an identified special educational need, compared to 15.9% across all other local authorities. And for those children with an EHCP, 4.2% of Lincolnshire's children had an EHCP compared to a national of 3.8. It is worth noting that the national did increase as well, up from 3.4 to 3.8 last year. In terms of the national context, there was a 9.9% increase nationally in the overall numbers of EHCP plans across the country, and in Lincolnshire this was a lower extent, mainly due to the work of the county, but also the commitment of schools in terms of levels of inclusion and meeting need. Nationally, there was a significant increase of 23% increase in the requests to assess across the country. In Lincolnshire, our numbers of requests to assess were much lower than nationally at 3%. And again, this was because of the introduction of some of the transformation strategies that we will talk about later. Lincolnshire still experienced a 15.5% reduction in the number of EHCPs during 2021, which is in contradiction to the national figures. And that has been part of the impact of the transformation work in terms of supporting schools and settings to meet need without the need to apply for an EHCP. And that in turn has reduced the level of financial demand overall on the high needs block. In terms of EHCPs across the county, it's worthwhile for the Schools Forum to note where those EHCP plans reside. And you can see that 24% of them were for under fives. 50.6% were for those children between the ages of 5 and 10, 22% for the ages of 11 to 15 years, 3.2% for those who aged 16 to 19 years, and 0.2% for those who are 20 to 25. In terms of district performance and district composition, there's a table set out at the top of page 48 that shows you the variation of SEND support and EHCP needs. You can see that all districts are approximately 4 to 5% of children with an EHCP, and SEND support varies more greatly between 10% and 15.47% in certain districts. So you can see in Lincoln City, for example, 15.47% of children are SEND support and 5% have an EHCP. In January, you can see that we had 2,072 children placed in special schools. That's a 4.7% increase from the previous year and represents 31.7% of all those learners with an EHCP within that community. 3.8% of children were placed in independent specialist provision. That has decreased slightly, but our number of children in INMS has increased as we've had to find the right places and the right placements for those children and young people within a setting that can meet need. And as Keena highlighted earlier, that is that jigsaw puzzle of finding the placements that can meet need in the appropriate level close to home. And sometimes that can mean an independent setting or an INMS is more appropriate, but the cost structure is different for that. In terms of top needs, primary needs for Lincolnshire, it's worthwhile noting for Schools Forum that social, emotional, mental health for the first time since the introduction of the reforms has become the highest primary need in Lincolnshire special schools, and moderate learning difficulties have dropped to 4th place of primary need. The 2 primary needs for pupils in independent provision is ASD and SEMH as well. So that's accessing those placements where ASD and SEMH needs can be met most effectively. In terms of timescales, you will see at the bottom of page 49 and turning over onto page 50, in 2020 in Lincolnshire, we had a severe challenge around timeliness due to a number of factors, and we recorded a 20-week timescale of 40.3%, and the England average was 58. As part of our transformation work and the work of our SEND team, to really focus and catch up and get back on track, I'm pleased to report to Schools Forum that the timeliness for that academic year was 94.5%, which is significantly above the national average and is one of the highest performances across the country, which we're really pleased and proud about. I won't cover the financial implications other than to build on Lizzie's comments around the table that's built in there that shows the amount of top-up funding that's been allocated into schools for those children within EHCP. And just to reassure the Schools Forum that over the last 2-3 years, we have reviewed the hourly rate and increased that to include the 2% base increase, a 1.25% health and social care levy, plus the enhanced employer pension increase of 1%. In terms of our special schools, you'll note in the last year that the funding to our special schools has increased by 2.2 million to 34.95 million for 21-22, and we continue to carefully review and work with the special school sector to make sure that bandings and fundings are meeting generally the need of the system. For that, we focus on the banding amounts of money, and they've increased by 2.8%. We've also looked and increased staffing block costs and increased that by 2%, the non-staffing block costs by 3%, and we've also looked at the progressive enhanced provision resource and how much that will take moving forward. And that, like I say, that 34.985 million supports the 2,128 places, which has increased by 102, as you will be mindful of the Building Communities of Specialist Provision programme progresses, and our specialist settings are either refreshed, expanded, or redefined as all needs settings. Okay, so INMS placements, Keena highlighted that just a few moments ago. So you can see that the cost for IMS has slightly reduced in terms of the number of placements, and that's because we've been able to allocate different placements in different settings as part of our strategy for being in the right school, close to home wherever possible. And it's also worth noting there, in terms of SEMH need, DLT did support additional spend on placements for 60 children and young people who required a specific SEMH setting. In terms of tribunals, I'll move on to that next. You will note and want to note that as a local authority, we have seen an increase in the number of mediations, which avoids the need for a tribunal, which was 101 compared to a mean of 34 for all English local authorities. And this has been as a result of changes in processes, challenges, as a consequence of us not always agreeing specialist provision. Overall, though, that has meant that our tribunal rates have come down. Further on in the report, you'll see information about absence and the impact of the pandemic on the attendance of children and young people within EHCP, and it has clearly had an impact, and so is clearly a focus for the local authority and our schools to enhance and ensure that attendance is maximised within the settings. Exclusions are outlined as well, and shows that we are approximately in range of national averages for exclusions. However, children with SEND do seem to suffer exclusion more so than those children without SEND. In terms of our high needs transformation programme, we've continued throughout the pandemic to roll out those strategies and maintained our partnership working and our partnership groups to ensure that it's co-produced and co-designed And I'd really want to thank the Lincolnshire Parent Carer Forum and our schools who have supported us with this implementation. We've introduced the Value in Send tool, which is now a digital tool so that schools can assess in the domains of need and to find that diagnostic methodology of meeting need and strategies that can be used. And the local authority has supported the creation of an inclusion toolkit so that colleagues have more resource available to them to trial with the children and young people. The local offer has been completely overhauled and relaunched as part of that and was supported by Lincolnshire Young Voices to make sure that it was accessible and meaningful, and the local offer will continue to be revised and developed as we move forward. More recently in the leadership briefings, we talked about the workforce development, which is delivered by a partner organisation within the system, our special schools. And it's really pleasing to hear the engagement and enthusiasm from our schools and from our partners in early year settings around the content of that training platform that will enable schools to feel more confident and for families in time to be able to benefit from advice, support and guidance through that training model using the LSCP platform. A transitions protocol has also been developed, and that's led to 4 young people successfully reintegrating within more inclusive environments, more local to home, and also giving them more access to mainstream curriculums and outcomes. So that's really pleasing and something we will continue to work as we currently work through a new work stream within the transformation programme. In September 2020, Ask Sal, which was an advice line for professionals to be able to contact and talk through cases, was launched, and you can see within the report the level of calls and also the positive impacts of that, of being able to meet need for children and young people through services that already exist, and where appropriate, moving on to callbacks to be able to give further advice and guidance from an EP. The multidisciplinary panel, which decides the decision-making panel, has been enhanced for 6 weeks and 16 weeks, and that has supported early years, specialist teachers, EPs, all coming together, and a real multi-agency, multidisciplinary approach to decision-making on whether to agree to assess and whether to finalise and agree EHCPs. And you can see overall that that has led to a slight reduction in the number of EHCPs within the county, which has meant that overall that has led to us being able to avoid certain levels of cost of assessment, which has resulted in a £2.1 million cost avoidance. Yet our overall high needs block is committed. It is balancing thanks to the transformation work and the work of the sector, but we are very mindful that in the future with the green paper that some of these funding mechanisms could vary and that pressure could remain. But it's certainly been a very busy couple of years in terms of the SEND work, and I just want to finalise by saying we should be really proud of the fact that as a local authority we continued to do our transformation work with partners during a pandemic, and that is now resulting in positive outcomes for some of our children and young people. So I'll stop there, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks very much, Martin. Can you please indicate either in the chat or by raising your hand if you've got a question for Martin, please, on that paper? Professor Durans, is that your hand up?
Yes, please.
Yep.
I refer to the last paragraph, last but one paragraph, I'm sorry, on page 57, which is a bit disturbing to read, that the growing cost of independent specialist placements is largely because Lincolnshire Special Schools has no capacity to take the rising number. Have we got a problem there? Or I can understand you're trying to improve transition, but what do you think is the situation? Are we going to have to put out more students outside our border? Is that going to be the solution to the problem?
Thank you, Professor. So I think some of this will be a consequence of the pandemic. We are seeing an increase in the demand of SEMH, social, emotional, mental health support that's required. Alongside this, we are expanding the special schools by 512 spaces. That will still be pressured. There will always be a pressure on the number of places within the county. But it goes back to my earlier point around making sure that children can access the right support in their mainstream. So it's not just about placements, it's also about support of those children and young people through support services, mental health in schools team, healthy minds and such like. And we will always need to use some element of independent, non-maintained placements. They're part of the fabric of that system. But as the next couple of years go on, more and more of the special school places will come online as those special school buildings are built in some instances, and some are extended. And in terms of those placements that we do commission currently, we will be continuing to look to commission in a more financially efficient way to make sure that they are good value, or as good value as they can be, whilst ensuring those children are in the right place for their needs. So it will take a couple of years for those places to come online, and you can see in the report some of those places have already come together. So we do need to keep an eye on it. It is a pressure. It will continue to be a pressure, but there is that plan in the background to address some of that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Keena.
Hi, just coming back to that point, Martin. I'm just curious. So I know, for example, we are expanding, obviously, and already I can foresee us filling up before I finally put all the furniture in. My concern is that there is a hope and expectation that the expansions of the special schools will alleviate some of the pressures on the independent sector costs, but I'm concerned that that we probably need to be prioritising those now in terms of consults. I've got no consults heading my way. I know that there is a primary age pupil who's just had that confirmed. That absolutely is right for our setting, and there is no sort of strategy. Well, it doesn't appear to be a strategy to have a two-phased approach. So I appreciate currently there's no space, but actually we need to be getting a consult ready so that we can put them in. Obviously we can't take all of the independent pupils out of their independent setting because some it's not appropriate for, but is there any analysis to identify those that should be in a special school or mainstream setting but there is no space? And is there a way that special school head teachers can get together to address this collectively as a group, both in terms of the locality, their nearest school setting, and get in front of this? Because otherwise, I fear that this expansion for special schools won't fix or have any dent in the problem.
Yeah, that's really helpful comment, and thank you, Keena. And I think what I would say is the new spaces and the expansion will assist and alleviate some of the pressure. It will never solve the pressure because the high needs system will always be pressured. In terms of the piece of work behind this piece of work, we've got an emerging and developing SEMH strategy that's being worked through and co-designed with some of our SEMH providers to begin to look at what we can do to support children and young people with SEMH needs in mainstream, in specialist setting, in INMS, but also looking at how they get to where they get to, how they end up in their placements. And we've done a piece of work on placement cohorts to review those placements to see are there any opportunities to look to assist at moving them back towards mainstream. For some, it absolutely isn't the right one, and we wouldn't want to move children if it's not the right thing for them in terms of education and social care and support. But it's definitely one of the work streams that's emerging, and Kate Capel's leading on as well. So we will keep that conversation alive over the next few months and into the autumn term with the special school sector as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would be particularly interested in helping in any way I can in that respect. So if I could, I'm trying not to join too many working parties, but if I would be very interested in supporting, because as one of the schools that is rapidly expanding, I believe it's going to be heading my way. And I appreciate the SEMH element is the highest priority, but there are the other cohort of students with cognition or communication interaction as predominant need who are in IMS settings. and not necessarily rightly placed for that reason. So happily get involved in that if I can.
Thank you. Thank you.
Katie, next, please.
Hi there. Yeah, I just want to say thank you first of all to Martin for the report. And I suppose I wanted to kind of come at it from a kind of a mainstream approach in terms of I'm really impressed with the vSend tool and the Ask Sal kind of offer that you're now giving to all of our schools in terms of trying to reduce the number of EHCPs that are coming your way. And I've spoken to you, Martin, in other meetings, but for me, it's a really, really important piece of work that I think mainstream heads really need to get on board with in terms of doing our bit to make sure that actually we're meeting need within mainstream and actually making sure that the children going through to the EHCP process are really the children that need to. And I think you know, again, the more and more schools get on board with that, hopefully that will ease the pressure in the system. But actually, I'm also seeing it's really kind of the quality first teaching going on now in my school because of those tools in terms of how it's upskilling my staff to meet those different needs is been really valuable. So I just want to say thank you. For me, I'm still trying to champion the vSend tool and the Ask Sal and all of that because I think it's really important that we recognise the part that we play in terms of reducing that pressure on the system. So I appreciate you doing the top down bit, but I think we've got to do the bottom up bit as well. So thank you to the SEND team. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Right, if there are no further, Josh, have you got your hand up there?
Just got there at the last minute, Chair. Yeah. I don't probably apologise to Martin rather than you. Thank you, Martin. Really helpful. First thing, I don't know whether here is a alternative provision representative. I don't know whether we're involved in some of that SEMH work or not. So apologies, but there is a standing offer. Anything we can do as an alternative provision sector to help. That we stand ready to do so. I had a couple of questions on page 47, I think it is. If that's okay. It's just around some of the data. First of all, on the new EHC plans issued in county, I realise every child and every healthcare and education plan is unique. Are we satisfied with the timeliness of identification of needs? So that 50%, 5 to 10ish, 22% beyond that. How does that sit with us? Are we getting in early enough? Are we satisfied that some young people are slightly late because that's appropriate for them, or is there any discomfort there?
Yeah, so thank you, Josh. And first of all, I think thank you for your offer to be involved in the SEMH work. And I'm sure Kate's making a note of that. I think it is dovetailed in already, but we'll double check. In terms of are we identifying early enough, I would suggest we are. Behind this data, what is really interesting is the in-year data, i.e. cohort data, year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, etc. So what we can see that the needs are being identified for the age ranges. What is slightly unusual and something that we've talked about with our partnership group a number of times is the sudden increase in applications to assess at transition points. So at year 5 going into secondary or coming in from early years into reception, it does seem to squash up to that end point rather than meeting the need or identifying the need earlier on. But we've been working through that with our partners and supporting the transitions project and protocol. Do we think we're over-identifying? I think we are seeing younger children, particularly younger, 1-year-old, 2-year-olds with needs being identified early on, more complex health needs, more medical needs, etc. And so it's always something that we would want to watch. I think for us, as Kate was mentioning, what we're committed to try and do is put the right kind of advice and support infrastructure in place so that needs can be met without necessarily an EHCP being required, so that the right services, the right offers are known, embraced and utilised so that needs are being supported without necessarily an EHCP allocated. Because if you look at the next page where the academic outcomes are looked at, it is fair to say that for some of these children and young people, an EHCP doesn't necessarily lead to better outcomes. It just means they get managed or supported in a different way. And if we can still achieve that, then that's only a positive. I hope that answered your question, Josh.
It did, thank you. And if I may, Gavin, there was just a second question on that same page. And these questions are both around the health and care element as well as the education element, because we all know every young person's unique. The number of plans ending, Martin, 298 versus 422 in the previous year, it references it because no longer in education, they left education. Is that different to the young person reaching 25? Because obviously the plans are 0 to 25, whereas education, there's different step-off points. So I'm just interested what the cause of that end is.
Yeah, so for some of that is change of, we've seen more children remain in education as a result of the pandemic post-16. So more children have actively decided to stay in that space, understandably. I think as children and young people get older, what we are seeing is an increase in the level of some employment opportunities and other options. And we're also having to track carefully the NEET figure and making sure that figure is up to date, ratified and checked upon. But it is something in terms of plan closures. That's another work stream that we're beginning to look at around what happens, why, and what's the detailed analysis behind it. Why does a plan no longer continue? Is it because of different destinations, life choices, and is it leading to increased aspirations rather than not kind of, we want the EHCP to lead to lifelong learning, lifelong employability, success, and being able to live a long and fruitful life. So that's something we need to come back to further. I don't know if Kate wants to add anything on that domain around the post-16 and closures, because she's overseen post-16 for a little while in the SEND service.
Oh, I did, and then move post. So Josh, I think Martin sort of set out a number of elements with that, but I think it comes down to as well that there's no automatic entitlement post 19 to an education. So as much as possible, what we're looking at is a timely exit from education, and as per the code of practice, that real planned transition, so that the education doesn't need to just keep rolling on. There's a real key aim that they're not just repeating learning, etc. I know our FE settings in Lincolnshire are excellent at supporting around that. But I think the other element that Martin's just touched upon is that what we're seeing is they're tending to end when they finish education, whether that's at 16, 18 or slightly older. What we need to be looking at is if needs are being met earlier through that robust support through an EHC plan, is there any reason why they can't be ending whilst they're part of that educational journey at an earlier point? It keeps going back to that right support at the right time. And if we've got that investment through the high needs block to put a high level of support in place, once that's been effective and met a child's needs in a number of cases, then the plan should be ceasing and the child should then be supported to that really robust graduated approach.
Okay, thank you. Happy with that, Josh?
Thank you. I am, and I agree in terms of a robust graduated approach. I'm not suggesting for 1 second this is the case in Lincolnshire, but us being vigilant that there are no perverse incentives to end plans early, likewise, is that robust graduation approach in its full sense, isn't it? So that was part of where I was coming from, but I'm really satisfied giving me those answers. Thank you both very much.
Thank you. And can I just highlight a message from Lee Mason in the chat there? I was having some technical issues, but she just wanted to put a comment there in that, she agrees that we need to look at the growing numbers within SEMH and the potential impact on our young people and pressure on our specialist schools. So I think you've already addressed that, Martin, that, that's going to be a work stream that is going to be obviously a key focus going forward. So thank you for that. If there aren't any further questions or hands, we've been asked to kind of note the content of that report. If there isn't, is there anyone that wants to disagree with that? Because I feel we've done that. So if that's the case, then we're going to carry that and then move on to item number 11. Thank you, Martin, which is the annual early years and childcare report on page 61 to 72. So Geraldine O'Neill, Sustainability and Development Manager, is going to present this for us. And we're asked to consider the content of the report and also agree the priorities for 22-23. So over to you if it is indeed Geraldine this time.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, and thank you, Gavin.
So this report is to provide you with an update on the progress we've made on the 7 key priorities that we outlined in our early years annual report that we delivered to you all in June last year, and then to outline the priorities for this financial year as well. So just to give you some context, the early years service offers information, advice, support, challenge and workforce development opportunities to all early years and childcare providers in Lincolnshire. Our focus is always on children's good levels of development at the end of the early years foundation stage, and with a particular emphasis on the most disadvantaged children to narrow the gap and ensure children are ready for school. At the bottom of page 61, top of page 62, I've just provided you with an overview of the early years DSG funding for this financial year. That's to ensure all 3 and 4-year-olds can access their funded education places. That is indicative budget based on pre-pandemic data that we used from January 2020 pupil census information. And we outlined that in the School Forum report that we delivered to you in January. The centrally retained funding enables us to provide the range of support that I've previously mentioned. There are 6 key areas that we support in the early years team. The funded education places for all 2, 3 and 4-year-olds, our statutory duty to provide sufficient early years and childcare places for all children up to the age of 18 for those children with special educational needs and disabilities, to deliver quality provision and ensure outcomes for children at the end of the EYFS, professional development and workforce training, inclusion funding and SEND advice and support, and then partnership and working with a particular focus on health and quality and delivery of children's centres. So in Lincolnshire, we currently have 870 Ofsted registered childcare providers. I say that with caution as it always changes and it's changing on a daily basis at the moment. 88% of the childcare market that we currently have is private, voluntary and independent-led provision, and 12% is delivered by schools. And 75% of the total providers in Lincolnshire are delivering the funded education places for 2 to 4-year-olds. We've developed an early childhood strategy, and a steering group was established in November last year. Working groups have now been created to drive forward some of the priorities to improve children's outcomes. Hopefully you can refer to the appendix that we've provided for an overview of what those working groups are. Just to give you, just to sort of touch on them really for you, there are 5 main working groups. The first focusing on development of early identification and TAC. The second looking at transition for 0 to 5 years, which includes all transition in a child's journey from birth through to school. The outstanding project looking at quality within the early years and childcare provision, pathways and access to the right support at the right time, and then workforce recruitment and retention, which is a particular concern across the sector at the moment, and it is impacting on providers' ability to deliver childcare places, so a particular focus for us. And then we've got 2 working groups that will underpin all of those other working groups. They will focus on data, providing us with a sound evidence base and looking at the performance information from the end of the foundation stage profile. And then also a communication and engagement working group, so that we've got a coordinated approach to working with families and professionals going forward. Childcare providers and a maintained nursery school are engaged in the steering group and on some of the working groups, as well as a number of other key partners, including health and early help, to ensure that we've got input from all necessary partners in those. The working groups will be looking at targeted pieces of work that will feed into the steering group for decision making. That will include important outreach work that we need to do with families to understand their needs. That will be high on our agenda for the coming year, and we will keep you updated on the progress of those working groups as they become more established. So just to give you a few updates on the previous priorities that we raised in our report to you last June. The first priorities was around securing sufficient childcare places to meet parent needs. We've reviewed our annual childcare sufficiency assessment cycle so that now aligns with school place planning. We have just completed 3 surveys, 2 with the childcare sector and 1 with parents. We had a really successful response rate to all of the surveys completed, which has provided us with some robust information to support our planning. The parent survey was hosted on the Let's Talk Lincolnshire platform, our new online platform, and that wielded 50% more responses than we'd had in our previous survey. So that was really good in terms of trying to get parent feedback. Some areas in Lincolnshire have been identified as requiring additional childcare places to meet demand, and so we know that we've got a particular pressure down in Spalding. We also have some pressures in Louth and Netlham, and an annual report at the moment is just being finalised, and that's going to be delivered to our DLT and exec DLT in July. And we've put together a delivery plan that has been developed with recommendations to support the development of new childcare places in some areas and support those sufficiency gaps that have been identified. The second priority that we had was to ensure all eligible children, 2, 3 and 4-year-olds, can access their early funded education places. We always have the highest take-up of 2-year-old entitlement in the autumn term, and I'm glad to report that 83% of the total children eligible were accessing places by the end of last autumn, so that had increased significantly since the pandemic. We know from the recent parent survey that cost was the most prohibitive factor for families accessing childcare. So we've appointed an outreach officer who's delivering key information regarding all government offers to parents and professionals so children can access early education. We know that tax-free childcare is underutilised nationally, so this is being promoted widely across the county. From the 2021 statistical first release, we know that Lincolnshire had 90% of our 3 and 4-year-olds accessing their funded education places. That was compared with 88% nationally. And I am optimistic that this year that percentage will have increased further, and we'll know more when data is released in the coming months. In terms of quality, Lincolnshire remains in line with national for at least good judgments at inspection. However, we are just below for outstanding, and so improving the quality of provision and increasing the number of outstanding judgments in Lincolnshire remains a key focus for us in the early years team. Our third priority was around delivering quality children's centres. The aim, obviously, is encouraging families as early as possible during those crucial 1001 days. Our maternity hubs continue to provide maternity care closer to home, and we've had over 1,700 individuals access antenatal appointments at children's centres in the last year. The antenatal offer is delivered in partnership with 0 to 19 Health Service, Early Years Practitioners and the Early Years Alliance. And the offer has remained virtual to allow as many families as possible to access it. Children's centre registrations are still at 100%. Attendance rates had dipped, but we've now they've really improved in the last year, and that's increased to 62%. Baby massage courses, we've had over 1,200 parents accessing those with their babies over the last year. And the Family and Babies programme, which is supporting partnerships between neonatal units and other services, has also been thriving. Our fourth priority was to focus on narrowing the achievement gap, support for those most vulnerable children. And we have been working with SEND Transformation Programme. Resources have been developed, and staff centrally and within localities have been trained up to complete joint education assessments to support the capacity within the SEND team as well. So lots of joint work going on there. Our fifth priority, to support providers understand the new Ofsted inspection framework, has been going well. We've focused our support with the providers most likely to be inspected. So Ofsted are prioritising those providers with less than good previous judgments and those who have yet to be inspected. So focusing our offer bespoke and through forums to childcare providers across the county. And we've had over 100 face-to-face audits completed so far during the last year. In terms of sector-led improvement, our sixth priority, we've facilitated transition clusters. They are obviously sector-led, but we've been facilitating those, and we've had 7 early years locality networks taken place across the county this year, supporting schools and childcare providers with strengthening transition support to improve outcomes for children. We've piloted the first transition forum, and participation was good. And the recent summer term transition meetings have had over 100 schools and settings attend, so that's been really positive. Our final priority was to deliver on quality training and a development programme. We've been delivering a mixture of virtual and face-to-face courses over the last year. Many childcare providers have requested to continue virtual courses. It really supports them to continue to access more easily and at varied times based on the obvious pressures that they have with delivering services. This has also reduced the cost for us, and we've had reduced venue hire costs, so we can offer more places as well when we're hosting courses online. The PDP that's been funded by the Department for Education has seen a large number of providers achieve awards and qualifications for settings and individuals, and that's enabled practitioners to deliver enhanced learning opportunities for children. And of course, our partnership with the LSCP continues to enable the whole of the early years sector to access fully funded safeguarding training, which of course is always a focus for us. In the conclusion, I've just outlined the priorities that we want to focus on during the next year. There are 12 in total. The first two are our statutory duties, so supporting funded education places for all 2, 3 and 4-year-olds. So that will continue to be a focus with a lot of outreach activities going on to increase children's attendance in early years education. And then sufficiency of childcare, which is a focus. And as I say, a paper is going to exec DLT next month, so we can look at recommendations for improving the sufficiency pressures that we have across the county. We'll continue to support the quality of provision across the county with support bespoke and face-to-face and through forums with providers. We'll be analysing the good levels of development from children at the end of the foundation stage profile data 2022, which we're eagerly awaiting. The information will be producing a set of targets based on children's outcomes. So we'll wait for the data to be produced at the end of the profile assessment in the summer term. We'll then also develop a training programme to support CPD within the sector, including a focus on SEN courses, of course, to enable staff to support those children with the greatest need. We want to develop a spec for the Best Start offer, and we're doing that in partnership with commissioning colleagues, review quality assurance systems within children's centres and refresh the quality assurance pathways. And then as part of our wider involvement in the Family Hubs agenda, we will be self-evaluating our early years services against minimum and go further standards that are included within the service specification. So we'll be developing an action plan to measure successes against standards, implement those with the working groups as part of the early childhood strategy and the steering group, as I've previously mentioned. And of course, then we will be publishing Lincolnshire's Best Start offer. Just in terms of risk and impact, we're mindful of the impact that the pandemic has had on children's educational outcomes. We'll be targeting support all areas identified as a concern following the EYFS profile data this summer. We know that participation levels are improving with early years, so this will support children's educational achievements. We want to continue to support there. We know there's more work to do to focus on access to other services, and the early childhood strategy working groups and the development of family hubs will aim to support all of that further. We will be monitoring Ofsted outcomes quite closely and taking a proactive approach by engaging with all providers to support their quality and improve those judgments. And we're also aware that the pandemic has impacted the overall deprivation levels within early years. And so we'll be responding accordingly to any potential increases in demand that we might see within the sector as they come to fruition. And finally, just to mention that we do recognise the increasing pressure that's on the early years and childcare sector, particularly from a financial perspective. This is having an effect on recruitment and retention across the sector, not just in Lincolnshire, but nationally. And as I previously mentioned, we've got a working group to focus on that and some of the concerns that are arising across the county. We will continue to provide additional support to the sector to reduce potential closures that could affect our statutory childcare sufficiency duty. And we've just launched some local authority web pages to specifically focus on promoting a career in childcare. Films and information that's being rolled out across job fairs, through schools and colleges and across the childcare sector to try and support and promote that further. Thank you,
Thank you very much, Geraldine. Thank you. Appreciate that. Right, is there anybody with any questions that'd like to come back to Geraldine on, please? Well, whilst people are thinking, the question that I had, which you kind of touched on at the end, Geraldine, was around recruitment and retention. And I just wondered if there's any particular themes that were coming out from the work that you've already started on that, in terms of the challenges around that recruitment tension. Is it around, and pay and conditions, or is it around the attractiveness of working in that kind of sector? Are there any kind of consistent themes that you're seeing around the kind of workforce issues?
Yeah, there's a number of themes that are coming out at the moment. Thanks, Gavin. One of them has been a reduction in we've seen a reduction in the number of childminders in the sector in the last year. We've seen a number of resignations. I think people following the pandemic had a change in terms of their career choices. I think that there is increasing pressure on the early years and childcare sector in terms of what they're delivering. Pay is a big factor. And we know that obviously the government did review the early years national funding formula and increase the levels of early years funding to local authorities within the spending review last year. It's not enough to cover the increasing costs of living, the insurance costs that childcare providers are seeing, all of those costs that we're all experiencing in terms of energy bills, food prices and so on. They're all affecting the sector massively. So whilst we have been able in Lincolnshire to increase the early years funding levels to providers as much as we were able to within the funding envelope that we were given, we still see a number of pressures on that sector to that. We are trying to do a number of things to support with enticing people into a career in childcare. So we are going to continue to do that. But this is one thing that's being focused on nationally as well. And I'm glad to report that I've had several meetings with the Department of Education about it, and there is some focus on it at government level as well. And they have got some colleagues within the early years team in the department working on recruitment and retention as a theme to try and support local authorities with it further. So we're told to watch this space on what might be offered to support us further with that as well.
Thank you. Josh, can you come in, please?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Geraldine. It's really interesting, as always, and lots to celebrate. Forgive my ignorance. Is there an appetite for, or do we do much to encourage collaboration and sharing between early years childcare and the primary sector? And I'm asking that particularly from the context of the challenges. Many of the challenges that we've identified and the risks are not unique to that youngest phase, and whether there are any opportunities there, appreciating there are different regulations, different organisations at play there, etc.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. I do think that that's an area that we want to try and encourage more. We're doing some work between providers and schools. The working group is really focusing on quite a lot of this at the moment to try and establish broader partnerships. And I do think that we need to do more there. We obviously already have transition clusters where we're bringing together providers and primary schools. But I do think that as part of that working group, there will be more focused and targeted pieces of work that we will do to bring those groups together. And I do think that we've recognised within that working group as well, we've developed an action plan really to look at some of these things. We recognise it's not just within early years and childcare, and it's not just in schools, it's actually broader than that and across the piece, isn't it, in terms of all services, and particularly I think pressure on those that require skilled workforce and qualification levels to maintain a high level of provision as well. So yes, I think is the answer. We're including that within the working group, but always want to do more in terms of collaboration there as well.
Great. Thanks, Geraldine. So we've been asked to consider the contents of the report and agree the priorities for 2023. I propose that kind of we've done that. Is there anybody that would like to disagree? Pausing for a moment to type, but I don't think so. So yeah, we'd like to accept that and say thank you very much, Geraldine, and we look forward to seeing how you get on with those priorities in the next academic year.
Thank you, Gavin.
We'll move on to item number 12, which is the regular kind of academies and trust update, which is on page 73 to 78. So I think I'm handing over to Lizzie again to just provide us with this regular update. Thank you, Lizzie.
Thanks, Gavin. So this report is presented at each of the 4 meetings and provides an update on the latest position regarding the number of academies and pupils across Lincolnshire. The report is based on the position as at the 1st of June 2022. Since the last report of September 21, no further schools have become academies, however 2 have applied to become so. The table on page 73 provides a breakdown per sector between maintained schools and academies now, and the projected position in 6 months' time, assuming that these 2 schools convert. Since the last report, 2 schools have joined the Lincoln Anglican Academy Trust, which is now the largest trust operating in Lincolnshire with 15 schools. The table in the middle of page 75 provides a list of the academy trusts that have the largest number of academies and free schools in Lincolnshire. There are 34 multi-academy trusts operating, and 78% of Lincolnshire academies, which equates to 147, are part of multi-academy trusts. The bottom of page 75 details the largest academies. The bottom of page 75 details the largest number of academy trusts nationally that operate in Lincolnshire, and the largest of those is the Academies Enterprise Trust, which has 57 academies, 2 of which are in Lincolnshire. The form is asked to note the content of the report.
Thank you, Lizzie. Any questions from anybody on that? Whilst we're waiting, I'll just jump in here. Lizzie, does this, well, I'm kind of asking the question because I might already know the answer, but does this track standalone academies that are moving into trusts, or is this purely maintained schools going into trusts? I only say that because I've lost an academy off the list. So I know that we've got 8, not 7, but one of our most recent one was obviously a standalone academy. And that's obviously with the white paper that's come out recently, we're probably going to see movement in that direction where standalone academies are moving into trusts. And I just didn't know if the paper either missed that one, particularly of our situation, or whether that wasn't something that you had oversight of at the local authority.
I don't know because I don't actually produce the report, so I'll have to go back and ask for you and find out which those.
Yeah, I can imagine that obviously local authority, you're not involved in that process, so I'm not sure how you would find that information out, but it's obviously useful because it's going to become a growing part of the picture. Yeah. So I'll leave that one with you. I haven't seen any other things in the chat, so I kind of propose that we note that report. Does anybody disagree? Great, thank you. Well, that's carried. And then we'll move on to item 13, which is the Lincolnshire Schools Forum work programme on page 79 to 80. And again, we include this for your information so you can see what's on the upcoming agenda. Our next meeting is the 6th of October, and we shall look forward to the reports that are listed there. And then we'll move on with the work programme from that point in the new academic year. So unless there are any further comments, I'd just like to thank you for your participation in the forum today. Really good questions, really good contributions from both officers and members. So thank you very much indeed. That concludes our meeting. So thank you for your attendance, and you can enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you, everybody. And I look forward to seeing you on the 6th of October.